Welcome to Whiskey Cast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 1068 for August 4th, 2024. Coming up in a few minutes.
My canned answer is the gears of democracy turn slowly, right? But 2 years is really getting to the point where our patience is wearing thin, and the excuses for not getting it done are falling on deaf ears at this point.
It's been 2 years since the Treasury Department's Tax and Trade Bureau, the TTB, issued its first notice of proposed rulemaking for a definition of American Single Malt Whisky. This week, American Single Malt advocates kicked off a campaign to persuade the TTB to get off the dime and issue a final definition. I'll talk with Steve Hawley, the executive director of the American Single Malt Whisky Commission, in a few minutes on Whiskey Cast in Depth. I'll also have tasting notes for 3 American Single Malts in the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Behind the Label, and much more. The news is next on this week's Whiskey Cast.
Gabriel Cardarella from Jewers here. The 2024 U.S. Open Championship may have ended, but you can still get your hands on the whiskey created to honor it. The new Jewers 19-Year-Old Champions Edition. Trust me, a whiskey you don't want to miss. More details coming up.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast. Ever wondered where Redbreast got its name? Well, let's go back to 1912 and be glad our bird-watching founder didn't spot the bar-tailed godwit that day. Proud sponsor of Whiskey Cast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. We'll begin with a promotion for Robbie Miller at Suntory Global Spirits. He's been heading up the Global Whiskies and Prestige portfolio for Suntory and has been named Interim Chief Global Brands Officer. Miller has also joined the company's executive leadership team. New British Chancellor Rachel Reeves is dealing with a £22 billion shortfall in tax revenue, and last year's massive hike in excise duty on whiskey and other distilled spirits is getting a big chunk of the blame. A new report commissioned by the Scotch Whisky Association shows the 10.1% tax hike a year ago this month cost the government almost £2.5 billion in lost revenue. That's a combination of increased interest payments on government borrowing caused by inflation and lost revenue from spirits, which accounted for £132 million between last August and the end of June compared to a year ago. SWA leaders are urging the Chancellor to reverse the tax hike when she issues the autumn budget October 30th. Diageo reported its annual finances this week after what CEO Deborah Crew called a challenging year. The number one drinks company had its first annual decrease in sales since 2020, led by continuing weakness in Latin America and the Caribbean, along with North America, where the economy continues to cut into consumer spending. Sales in North America were down by 2%. Diageo shares hit a 52-week low this week following the report. Campari Group reported its half-year finances this week with a performance outpacing analyst expectations. Sales globally were up by 3.8%, with a 6.9% increase in the second quarter. Sales in the Americas account for almost half of the company's business, and were up by 6.8% compared to a year ago. New whiskeys of note this week. Glenmorangie has released Signet Reserve, a twist on the classic Signet. It's finished in Pedro Jimenez casks. It'll be a limited annual release available at whiskey shops for $345 a bottle. Benriach has released its oldest whiskey yet, the Benriach 1966 cask aged 50 years. It comes from an ex-bourbon cask filled in September 21, 1966, and carries a price tag of $25,000 a bottle in the U.S., where just 4 bottles are available. Duncan Taylor is kicking off its new Rarest Reserve series with 2 vintage Macallans, a 52-year-old distilled in 1969, and a 33-year-old. What makes them unusual is that both are bottled in 100-milliliter bottles with just 500 bottles per edition. Pricing for the 52-year-old is £7,850, while the 33-year-old carries a £630 price tag. In the States, Two Times Oak Whiskey has released a new bourbon finished with French oak chips. Master blender Dixon Dedman's double oak process uses pieces of charred oak that are inserted into the whiskey while it matures to give the whiskey a flavor influence without the need to transfer it into a second cask. It's part of the 2x Oak series and will carry a recommended retail price of $50 a bottle. Kentucky's Limestone Branch Distillery will be releasing its 2024 batch of Yellowstone Limited Edition Bourbon next month. It's the 9th release in the series. Master distiller Stephen Beam blended 7 and 17-year-old bourbons together before finishing them in French oak, brandy, and cognac casks. It'll carry a recommended retail price of $100 a bottle. Town Branch Distillery in Lexington, Kentucky is out with Town Branch Kentucky Straight Rye this week. The whiskey received high marks after its release in 2021 and has been highly allocated ever since. This release will be the first in an annual series for National Rye Month each August. Only 500 cases will be available this year, with a recommended retail price of $49.99 a bottle. The term bottled in bond is not reserved just for bourbons, and Westward Whiskey in Portland has released what may well be the first bottled in bond American Single Malt. It's a 7-year-old whiskey distilled in the spring of 2017, and it's an exclusive bottling for members of Westward's Whiskey Club, priced at $100 a bottle. Just up the road in Seattle, Westland Distillery is releasing 2 new American Single Malts. One's an 8-year-old beer cask finish that uses 6 different types of beer casks in the maturation, while the other is a 5-year-old wine cask finish using 5 different types of Washington wine casks. The goal was to celebrate Washington State's brewing and winemaking heritage. Both releases will be available through the distillery's website for $75 a bottle this month, before going nationwide in September. And finally, which countries have the highest rates of alcohol consumption? According to World Health Organization data, Romanians consume an estimated 17 liters of pure alcohol each year, equivalent to 18 bottles of beer a week. Georgia, Czechia, Latvia, and Germany round out the top 5 countries. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Let's check the calendar now and see what's happening around the world of whiskey. Tasmanian Whiskey Week kicks off on Monday and runs through next Sunday with events all over Tasmania. Royal Mile Whiskey's annual Whiskey Fringe Festival kicks off this Friday and runs through next Sunday in Edinburgh, Scotland. The Kensington Wine Market in Calgary, Alberta has a tasting of Whiskey Sponge and Decadent Drinks whiskeys on the 13th. Sagamore Spirit Distillery hosts its monthly Whiskey on the Waterfront party on the 17th in Baltimore, Maryland. And August 24th is a busy day. The Chicago and Denver Summer Whiskey Festivals are that day, along with the American Whiskey Show in Sydney, Australia, and the Brandy Library in New York City has a whiskey battle tasting that day, pitting whiskeys from Scotland and Japan. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendars at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast. Kentucky and Ireland have plenty in common. 2 homes of horse racing. Bluegrass music is said to have Irish roots. Okay, it's not the longest list, but the Redbreast Kentucky Oak Edition only strengthens the bond. Finished in sustainably sourced Kentucky oak for a captivating nose and round taste. I see a triple crown in this thoroughbred's future.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast In Depth is brought to you by Oban and the Classic Malts lineup. The fight for a definition of American Single Malt Whisky started back in 2016 when a group of craft distillers joined together to form the American Single Malt Whisky Commission. They have fought an uphill battle ever since. Federal regulations in the U.S. do not define single malt, and the Commission's members want something akin to the regulations in Scotland, which clearly define what a single malt whiskey is. This week marked 2 years since the Treasury Department's Tax and Trade Bureau opened a proposed rulemaking process to define American single malt once and for all. Following the initial public comment period, nothing, except vague promises that it's a priority for the TTB staff. We got that again this week when TTB spokesman Thomas Hogue told reporters that the hope is to have a final rule published by the end of the year. As you might imagine, that has single malt distillers frustrated, and industry groups started a campaign this week to put pressure on the TTB to issue a definition. I spent some time on a Zoom call this week with Steve Hawley, the executive director of the American Single Malt Whisky Commission. So it's been 2 years since the TTB issued its notice of proposed rulemaking. What's happened in that time period that is cause for optimism?
Cause for optimism? Well, certainly the continued growth of the category, both in real terms, volume, but also in reputation. So, there are over 250 distilleries that I know of making single malt whiskey in this country. From the biggest of the big to the smallest of the small. So, none of these folks would do that if they didn't see the promise in it. And, that's a lot of whiskey distilleries making whiskey and making single malt. So, the need for a formal definition is only heightened over the last 2 years.
Any idea why the TTB is taking so long to do this?
Well, I can only guess, right, Mark? It's not something that they broadcast, right? What it is that they're doing, how they're doing it, what time frames. Now they do issue unified agendas. We are always on that unified agenda and always assured by them that we are a high priority. But why it's taking so long, you can only guess. My canned answer is the gears of democracy turn slowly, right? But 2 years is really getting to the point where our patience is wearing thin, and the excuses for not getting it done are falling on deaf ears at this point.
Why do we need a definition of American single malt?
Well, we need it for a number of reasons. First and foremost, it's for the consumer, and that's what we talked to TTB about from the beginning. And the beginning being 2016, if you can believe it. So it's been 2 years since they issued the NPRM, and that is shocking in and of itself that it's taken so long for them to take the final step. But it's been a hell of a lot longer that we've been asking them to address this. And yeah, it's for the consumer first and foremost. The consumer needs to have confidence that what they think is in a bottle that says American Single Malt Whiskey actually is in that bottle. There are examples of people putting single malt on a label in this country that the vast majority of people globally would not recognize as single malt. So that is a problem. And that's a need for a definition there. The other thing is just, American competitiveness on the global stage and our standing in the global conversation of American single malt. And the absence of a formal definition is raising a lot of eyebrows because they see the proliferation of this category as much as we do. We have distillers that want to export and compete on a global stage. And the lack of a definition is making that more challenging for us.
How so?
Well, reputation, first and foremost, competitive markets looking at us with a suspect eye and questioning, the validity of the category, the integrity of the category is a problem. We also have, we've been on a crusade in the last week or so with our good friends and partners at Discus, and they've been very much supporting us in our efforts to try to get TTB to move on this. And they even face the same things globally. So if they're working hard to get reciprocal arrangements with other markets. We've heard specifically from some markets they have that, we're not going to reciprocate a definition if you guys don't even have it yourselves, right? So that becomes a problem for us in establishing a foothold in export markets.
This category has really skyrocketed in recent years when you've got companies like Diageo and Beam entering the market.
Mm-hmm.
Give me a sense of just how much it has exploded.
Well, I get this question a lot. What is the size of the American single malt whiskey category? And that's a really challenging thing to put a finger on because, yes, while we have some of the large spirits companies, almost all of the large spirits companies playing in the American single malt space, we have a lot more distilleries that are smaller and are not reported in the standard studies. So it's hard to put a number on, how big this category is. It's one thing that I've been trying to champion with my own membership because the best way to get that data is from us, the people that are making it. But again, I said there's about 250 or so distilleries making single malt. My membership is only 105, 106 right now. So to get an accurate picture is really difficult, but you just have to kind of take it on, feel really, and what you see out there in the market. And how many releases you see, how many awards are being won, et cetera.
What happens if we don't get a definition before Election Day?
Before Election Day? Well, Election Day is right around the corner. So I've certainly been concerned that the frenzy around the election is going to hinder the ability to get this across the line. My big fear is that regardless who wins the election, new administrations are coming, and new administrations come with new priorities. So TTB is part of the Treasury Department, and they're at the behest of what the agenda is for the Treasury Department. And the administrations certainly have a great deal of influence over what that agenda should be. So my big concern is that we get put at the bottom of the pile if there's a change, when there's a change in administration. So, what could happen? This could drag on for 4 more years, Mark. That's the worst case scenario. That absolutely could happen. And that's why, we're really putting the pressure on them to live up to the unified agenda that they have published, which says in September, this is a top priority for them. It doesn't say in September they're going to do this. It says it's a priority for them. So TTB is not in the business of making commitments from a timing perspective. But again, they have assured us that it's a top priority. So as long as they are not asked as the Treasury Department to reshuffle their priorities, hopefully this can happen quickly.
What could the market do if and once a definition is approved? What could the market be for American Single Malt?
Well, I think the sky's the limit. What's going to happen as soon as there is a formal definition, there's certainly going to be a wave of publicity and a lot of support. I think you'll see a lot more people get into single malt whiskey. I said there's about 250 distilleries, but there's 3,000 distilleries in this country. So I think you'll see more people making single malt. I think you'll see the people that are making single malt, particularly the ones that make other things, put more investment and more energy into making more single malt. And I think you'll see a greater number of distilleries exporting their products all over the world. But you'll also see things in the trade. And this is one of the things that's hindering us right now, is that the trade is waiting on this as well to make some of their moves. Retail stores dedicating an American single malt shelf in their space. Magazine and publications, having an American single malt category in their review sections. We've heard from several that said, well, when it's a category, we'll categorize it as such. But until then, we won't do that. So I think you'll see a lot of those things, which will really kind of, put some wind behind the sails for the category. And right now, frankly, we're kind of stuck in dead water. We hear from retailers now that they're starting to question the viability of the category just because it's taking so long to formalize a definition. So we're at a point 2 years after a proposed rule where their inaction is actually a detriment to our category. So instead of them doing the work that supports distillers in this country, and by the way, all the ancillary partners that come with that, their delay is actively hurting us at this point.
I think that about does it. Anything else you can add I didn't ask about?
No, I think that's it. I appreciate the stage. This is an important thing. So, I hope they listen to Whiskey Cast, right? And get their job done.
Well, I know that Tom Hogue, the TTB spokesman, said earlier this week that they do hope to have a definition approved by the end of the year.
Yeah. Well, he's also said that before.
Yeah.
So, and that's the thing. That's the thing with these unified agendas. If you look at any of his comments, very closely, he never commits to a timeline. He never commits to it being done. And we've been, quote, high priority on their unified agenda many times over. Last September, we were promised the same thing, that we are a top priority, and that they were hoping to get it done in this session. And that session came and went. I don't know. I can't tell you how many people that I run into say, "Oh, well, guess what? I know it's going to happen in September because I heard or I read the unified agenda." And I said, "You can't put too much stock in that. They've proven time and time again that you can't go by that." So hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully Tom is right and that they will get this done. And the more pressure we can put on them, that's all we can do at this point, is just make our voices be heard.
Do you know of any distilleries that have, because I know we're seeing a bunch of craft distilleries going out of business. Have you heard of any in the American Single Malt range?
Let me think. Yes, I have heard of a couple. What I'm hearing right now mostly is people reaching out to me asking if I'll spread the word about capacity availability. A lot of distilleries are offering up capacity for contract distillation. And I'm seeing that now. Those that get some of those contracts will survive. Those that don't, I think you'll see some more closures. Today's not a great day for the economy. And I think things are going to get a little tougher before they get better. But I have heard of a couple people. I've had a couple members that didn't re-up their membership this year because they're shutting things down. But I think one or two at this point.
Thanks to Steve Hawley for joining us this week on Whiskey Cast In Depth. If you'd like to join in the campaign to pressure the TTB to issue a final ruling, Discus and Spirits United have an online petition available at the Spirits United website. We have posted a link to the site in the show notes for this episode at whiskycast.com. Whiskey Cast In Depth is brought to you by Oban, a deliciously smooth single malt known for its coastal charm and Highland heritage, loved by whiskey lovers worldwide. Discover Oban's full lineup at malts.com. Let's take a look at 3 American single malts in the What I'm Tasting This Week department, starting with the 4th edition of Westland Distillery's Colère. The goal here is to explore flavors that heirloom strains of barley can produce in a whiskey. It's bottled at 50% ABV, and the nose is fruity and nutty at first with subtle spices and a nice maltiness. The taste is spicy with white pepper and clove, balanced by roasted nuts and barley sugar, with a good balance and complexity. The finish is long and spicy with a touch of dried fruits. I'm scoring Westland's 2024 release of Colère a 93. The Quint family at Cedar Ridge Distillery in Iowa wanted to create a cigar malt, And they've done just that with the aptly named Untitled Cigar Malt Project. It's a cask-strength bottling at 57.45% ABV, and the nose is malty with brown sugar, tobacco leaf, figs, dates, honey, and subtle spices. The taste is thick, chewy, and spicy with black pepper and chili powder, complemented by brown sugar, figs, and dates, while the finish is long and dry with lingering spices. I'm scoring the Untitled Cigar Malt Project from Cedar Ridge Distillery a 93. And finally, 10 Mile Distillery in New York's Hudson River Valley distills and matures Little Rest American Single Malt. Their Founders Edition is bottled at 46% ABV. The nose is malty with a touch of brandy, toasted caramel, subtle spices, honey, and vanilla. The taste is dry and fruity with spicy notes of clove and cinnamon, red apples, and a slight nuttiness, while the finish is long with gently fading spices. I'm scoring the Little Rest Founders Edition American Single Malt a 92. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,700 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
Every year, Dewar's, the official Scotch whiskey of the U.S. Open Championship, rolls out a special limited edition whiskey to celebrate that year's tournament. The 2024 championship wrapped up in June, but the 2024 Dewar's 19-year Pinehurst edition is available now, and you don't want to miss it. This year's 19-year whiskey is double-aged, then extra-matured in rye casks, offering a rich profile with notes of pear and heather honey. There's a hint of spice in there, too, along with a dusting of cinnamon and cocoa powder. It's a sensory delight for any true whiskey or golf fan. So trust me, my fellow aficionados, grab a bottle and enjoy a whiskey crafted with the same skill and precision that makes the U.S. Open legendary. Please drink responsibly. Copyright 2024. Dewar's Blended Scotch Whiskey, 46% alcohol by volume. Imported by John Dewar & Sons, Coral Gables, Florida.
Let's open up the inbox and see what people are talking about this week. Our community segment is presented by Waterford Whiskey. Jake Emmon posted a piece on Food and Wine's website this week titled U.S. Craft Distilleries Are in Crisis, highlighting the problems many small producers face in getting distribution for their whiskeys and the general lack of legal direct-to-consumer shipping for distilled spirits. We've posted a link to the piece in the show notes for this episode at whiskycast.com. And after I posted a link to it in the WhiskyCast community app, we got several responses. Rick at the Whiskey Zone posted this. The fact that wineries can legally ship to 47 states and spirit producers can only have access to 8 speaks to a massive disparity that should be addressed before many small distilleries close their doors. But in the current political climate, I wouldn't hold my breath. And NTX Matt added this. Too many states have too much in the way for self-distribution. If I want to order a bottle and a carrier is willing to ship, let me order it. I know that here in Texas, numerous distilleries and breweries have gone to the state to fight, and that is when the distributors step in and praise the goodness that is the 3-tier system. If it is so great, how is it that I can order a bottle online months before it makes it to any local store? This also hurts the shows that come through. If your bottles are not part of the distribution in the state, good luck getting them on a table at a show. And finally, Andre D'Almeida had a quick comment on last week's episode with Georgie Bell from the Heart Cut. Just listen to this week's WhiskyCast episode today whilst driving. Excellent as always, Mark. Keep up the great work. Thank you for the kind words, Andre. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, download the free WhiskyCast community app and join the conversation. You'll find it in your app store. You can also find us on X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, and the email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Our community segment is presented by Waterford Whiskey on the web at waterfordwhiskey.com.
Trevor Harris, Alan Ross and Amy Jackson, Pat and Dennis Booth, Alan Mooney, John MacDonald. Just a few of the growers who help to make us the biggest distillers of organic whiskey in the world. Waterford Whiskey, the most naturally flavoursome single malt.
Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. During the news, I mentioned Westward's new bottled and bond American Single Malt and noted that the term bottled and bond doesn't just apply to bourbons. In fact, any distilled spirit can be bottled and bond as long as it meets the requirements, namely being distilled in the same distilling season by the same distiller at the same distillery, matured for at least 4 years in wooden containers, unaltered other than by filtration or chill proofing, and reduced in proof to 50% ABV by the addition of pure water before being bottled at 50% ABV. Now, there are special rules for some spirits. For instance, if someone wanted to make a bottled and bond vodka, it's possible, but the aging has to take place in wooden containers that have been lined with paraffin or some other substance that will keep the spirit from coming into actual contact with the wood. What's the point, then? By the way, a bottled and bond gin has to be matured in either paraffin-lined or unlined wooden containers for at least 4 years. Can there be an imported bottled and bond whiskey? Yes, but only from countries which have their own standards for bottled and bond whiskeys, and then the name of the country has to appear in the same font and type size as the bottled and bond language on the label. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. That's all for this episode of Whiskey Cast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskeyCast, or you can use the WhiskeyCast community app. Download it today from your app store. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
A thoughtful gift is hard work. What you need is a go-to multi-purpose gift for all occasions. A bottle of Redbreast can say, "Enjoy every minute, they grow up so fast." Oh. And equally nails, "Apologies for the back pain, I should have just hired a moving company."
Proud sponsor of WhiskeyCast, Redbreast. Pass it on.
The 2024 release of Dewar's 19-Year-Old Champions Edition is out now. Available at Dewars.com. Get it while you can and appreciate every double-aged rye cask finished dram. Please drink responsibly.
Whiskey Cast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2024, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.